Welcome back to Wolverine Confidential, your Michigan sports podcast. We've got a great edition this week, full of contention and debate. I'm your host, Eli Zink, a producer here at MLive, joined by these fellas.
I'm Andrew Kahn, Michigan basketball beat writer for MLive.
I'm Aaron McMann, Michigan football beat writer for MLive.com.
So we got our couple big topics today that broke. First and foremost, let's get the debate going.
Yeah.
We can now gamble on sports. I'm no longer going to be illegally doing it. Wait, I've never gambled on sports, but I'd maybe be interested now.
Well, see, you got to pump the brakes there. We cannot do it yet. That's the thing.
So I got to retract all my bets that I placed.
The Supreme Court has opened the door for states to legalize sports betting, but it's now up to the states as opposed to, before Monday where Nevada was grandfathered in.
I was going to say, if we pump the brakes even more, you could theoretically have done it in Las Vegas if you choose to, and many people do go out there to choose to do that.
And I did. It sounds like maybe you do, or you're more of an online guy. Aaron, I learned, is a Vegas guy. Our man behind the camera used to live there. He was really immersed in the scene. So yeah, I used to go there for March Madness, the opening weekend, basically like 10 straight years up until this season when I was a little busy with the Wolverines. But
so you guys made some money.
I have. I've lost some money too.
I made some. I've lost some. Yeah.
Isn't betting on sports doesn't it feel like, because if you're a sports fan or a sports writer, you sort of feel confident in your knowledge of the game, whereas like if I'm at the slot machine, I don't feel a lot of confidence in how it works. I know there is strategy to it, as I've been told by my trusted colleague.
Well, yes and no. I'd say that yes, playing the slot machine is completely luck. It's like playing the lottery, chance game. There is skill in sports betting, but I don't claim to have it. I know how difficult it is, and over time I'm going to be like right at 50%, which means I'm a loser because they take their little piece of it.
Sure.
Yeah. It's much harder than it looks.
The thing about sports betting, and from my perspective, since I do this full time, I try and avoid watching as much outside of what I'm covering as possible. So for me, when I go to Las Vegas and bet on games, it creates interest in games I wouldn't normally care about. You're looking at the board, and you're looking at lines, and you're trying to figure out what you're going to do. And there's this parlay thing where you can bet on multiple games at once on one ticket and try and win more money than usual. It makes you have a vested interest in games. Like I said, I wouldn't care about. I can remember one of the first times I was to Las Vegas. I won. I think it was a 7 or 8 team parlay. I won $600. It was a big amount. But the game I needed to win it was I think UD, University of Detroit, played Cleveland State in men's basketball. I wouldn't have cared about that otherwise. But I was glued to the screen.
You're not a huge Cleveland State fan?
I'm not. I can't say that I am. But I was glued to the TV. I was glued to my ESPN app, following the score. It drums up interest for games I think that otherwise people wouldn't care about.
So that leads me to, I think, my first question here that we want to cover, in that it maybe makes sport itself more interesting. And we've confirmed that. But is it ethically something that should be allowed because of all the slippery slopes that can lead to, from players betting, Pete Rose situations? It could be a slippery slope, could it not?
I would think legalizing it would bring it out of the shadows, if anything. It's already happening, like you alluded to, maybe in your intro. You can do it online. You can do it with local, bookmakers. So there's already, and you can do it obviously in Vegas legally. So I don't see how that would cause a problem. I don't have a moral issue with it at all. I don't. There's. How is it different necessarily than the lottery or a bingo game that's for cash, or scratch-offs, or really any of these things where you're putting money out and it's getting distributed to a handful of winners. So
sure, I'm of the same belief. I think at the end of the day, I don't think it really matters. However, I do see where the leagues are coming from in terms of preserving the integrity of their game. Like you mentioned, the Pete Rose situation. You've seen instances before where I can remember the instance in Toledo about a decade ago where a coach was in trouble or players were in trouble for point shaving. It's happened before. Players have gotten in trouble for it. Right. There's always that concern, especially, and we're going to get into this topic I think later on, but college athletes not getting paid all it takes is all it takes is someone walking up to them with a boatload of money, asking them to throw a game or impact a game somehow, and it could become a big deal. So I get where the leagues are coming from, especially at the NCAA. The pros not so much. You're seeing more of the leagues, I guess, embrace it. You're seeing the NBA, for instance, as Adam Silver, the commissioner, has come out and said, we're fine with this. In fact, they're going state by state to members of Congress or members of Congress in each state, asking them they want a 1% royalty fee off of this stuff. They want to try to make money off their likeness. They're saying, well, if this is going to become legalized in the United States and people are going to bet on it with regularity, in mass, we want our cut too. So I think you're going to start to see some of these leagues embrace it. At the same token, I think the NFL came out yesterday with a statement and said, well, hold on for a second. We're going to ask the Congress to look at this a little bit more because they are concerned about the integrity. So I get it. They don't want their games being impacted negatively by this. And you're seeing it more. I think there's been in the last decade or so with sports betting, prop bets have become a huge deal. You're not necessarily betting on the game, but you're betting on certain instances or events happening inside the game. That's where I think the bigger concern is. You see it a lot with the Super Bowl and whether somebody does something a certain amount of times in the game or whatever. You come up with any scenario. That's where I think it could become a big deal too.
Now those bets are they're limited how much you can bet on those props. It's not like just betting on Michigan to cover 10.5 points or something like that. Right. When you get into those props, especially some of those, I think, novelty props they call them with, the Gatorade color or how long the national anthem will be, something that you actually could know the answer to in advance for sure. I don't think they're letting you put thousands of dollars on that. But yeah, I find the NFL's response borderline comical because we all know how much gambling drives interest in the NFL. We talked about how it can drum up interest in an individual game. Certainly fantasy sports, which where that falls on the gambling spectrum, especially DraftKings and FanDuel.
Yeah. Now what happens, it's, you sort of feel bad for those companies since they got sort of struck down effectively, and and suddenly that's probably going to be legal in a very short period of time, at least in probably a lot of states. But as you both alluded to, the players' involvement, obviously with the prop bets, you can't anticipate that until it happens, right? So that bet becomes alive within the game. But how would it affect schools like Michigan, these schools who have huge fan bases, a university that makes a ton of money off the football players? And we're going to get into paying athletes in a little bit. But how is this going to affect a team like Michigan, or even with basketball when they made their tournament run? Couldn't there be an avenue there where you start to get into that ethical gray area where these athletes are either a part of sort of the scheme or can get taken advantage of by the system, by the university, who would be profiting even more off players while these amateurs are...
If they start taking their cut. Yeah, no, I hear that. I mean, I just think some of these other issues are already present. I mean, you can already bet, obviously, in certain places, and then there's the, underground market. So as far as fixing games, I'm not sure that the prevalence will increase just because now it's legal. I mean, the kind of person who's going to get involved with fixing a game probably is not, emboldened by the fact that it has now been made illegal in the state. He's probably going to do it anyway.
They tried already.
Yeah, so I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. I
think the leagues are going to try and do their best to separate this. Obviously, they don't want that. I don't think they necessarily want that image of we're in bed with gambling and like we're totally embrace this and we're gung ho and everything else. I think that you're seeing the leagues embrace it, but I think it's more of another revenue stream. They look at it like, well, if it's going to be legalized, we want to cut. But at the same token, there are rules in place where athletes aren't like the NBA. Athletes, they're not allowed to gamble at all. Period. The lottery,
and they can't fill out a bracket.
Exactly. They can't do. Technically, they're not allowed to do any of that. So I don't think that changes at all with this. I don't think that that is impacted. But like I mentioned before, the NBA, some leagues they're going to look to capitalize off this, and I don't blame them.
And it's just one other thing. I mean, as far as like the timeline for this, I'll have a story that'll be on MLive.com. Certainly, by the time listeners and viewers are taking in this podcast, but I'll just tease it a bit now, I guess, to say that in talking to some politicians and other folks, Michigan is probably not was not as prepared for this Supreme Court ruling as, say, New Jersey, which was taking a lot of steps and is really ready to hit the ground running.
State law, I believe, in 2014. Is that
Yeah,
right?
so they're saying they're ready. They'll be ready maybe by the NBA Finals. Michigan has put in some groundwork, and they have some infrastructure with actual casinos here in Detroit and really all over the state. That one Michigan representative I spoke to in the state house said by football season it's a possibility. I mean, it could be as early as this fall that you could be taking bets, at least at the casinos. Sure. I think then the next step is whether you could walk into your local deli and get a little betting ticket, or of course online or through some sort of app. That's really the next step.
I'm curious to see, especially with the Detroit casinos, 2 of which are owned by either folks that own major professional sports teams or in bed with them. So, like, for instance, Dan Gilbert owns Greektown Casino in Detroit. He owns the Cleveland Cavaliers, and you got the Ilitch family that owns Motor City Casino. I know in certain states, when folks who own casinos are also own major professional sports teams, they're not allowed to take bets on their own team.
Yeah, so that happened out in Vegas with
the Malou family, right?
The Rockets owner, I believe, is what happened. And with this recent series, I saw some report about if you had the Rockets. If you had the Warriors winning the Western Conference, you're already paid out or something, because they cannot pay out anything regarding the Rockets. It was just one particular casino out there, which was interesting. I have to imagine they limited their bets. Again, they're limited their. Yeah. But anyway, it
was the same thing. The Malou family, I think I don't know if
the
they
Kings.
Still,
right.
The Kings. They own the Palms Casino in Las Vegas. It was the same situation. They don't own the Palms anymore, but it was the same situation. They couldn't take bets on the Sacramento Kings. So I'm curious to see, should it happen here in Michigan? Should it be legalized and everything else? I'm curious to see how.
So that's my next question: is how does that change the complexion of a university town like Ann Arbor? I think a lot of our listeners are either from the area, or if not, come to games and they understand the sort of dynamic of the college town. Could this ruling, specifically because it's such a huge sports town, change the complexion of what the city is like?
I don't think so. I mean, I think like the folks that are already interested in sports gambling now, I think some of them are already doing it in some degree, whether it's a bookie or it's the Bovada app you can easily get that is technically illegal to use, or they're going to Vegas to do it.
Do you have that on your phone?
I can't say that I do. Okay. I know people that do though. But they're like we mentioned, there are avenues already. People are doing it already. So to legalizing it, you're bringing it out from underneath out of the shadows. People can do it legally, but as of now, they're not going to be able to do it in Ann Arbor. I mean, they're going to have to go to a casino. They're going to have to go to a racetrack. They're going to have to go to a certain area to do it. So I don't think it changes much. I mean, people who are betting on games already, who want to bet on games, some of them are already doing it.
So the immediate impact may not be as significant as it felt like when it was all over the headlines the other day, but it is going to change things to a certain degree.
Right.
What hasn't changed recently is whether or not players can have any access to money outside of their scholarships. And we talked a little bit about it with if players are betting or being bet on. How does that affect their, I guess, income or profit from that? And that brings us to, should players be getting compensated in any form outside their scholarships?
Yeah, we'll start. I guess we'll back up and talk about the reason we're bringing this up. But I was in Toledo Thursday night. Jim Harbaugh was speaking. He was the keynote speaker at this. They call it the Access for Justice Awards dinner. It was several groups in Toledo. Legal groups came together. It was like they're giving out awards for area lawyers and stuff like that. Anyway, this has been a topic Jim Harbaugh has championed now for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Giving low-income folks, arguing for more legal access for low-income folks. He spoke at length about it on Thursday night. Afterwards, he did a Q&A session with folks in attendance. There were plenty of Michigan fans, obviously, there that purchased tickets and decided to sit in the crowd. But he had a question about it. An individual stood up, asked him, what do you think about the idea of paying players? And he went into it was a 5 or 6 minute answer. It was pretty thoughtful. It was lengthy. I'll skim from what I'm looking at right now, but he made the argument that they go to high school, they go to post-education high school, kids are able to, non-athletes are able to get jobs and they have the time to do so. Athletes necessarily aren't allowed to do that. Now, Jim wasn't necessarily in favor of the idea of paying players, but he had some other ideas for it. He mentioned deferred compensation, the idea of saving money for later on, either after they graduate or after they leave the university, and then he also brought up the idea which is I thought was fascinating. But he mentioned the Amazon TV show the Michigan football program was recently participated in. The university collected $2.25 million from that. From my understanding, they used a bulk of that money for the new weight facilities there on campus. But he mentioned that maybe if we do it again, and they're considering doing it for a second season, using that money to either purchasing Amazon stock, or he mentioned some other things that I thought were fascinating. So he's not necessarily for it, but he's coming up with other ideas. Now, obviously, we know the NCAA has obviously not allowed it.
Sure.
We've seen union attempts fail in the past with football. So it's an interesting topic. Harbaugh brought it up, and it's one for debate. That's for sure.
It is, and Andrew, you may have some more thoughts on this, but if I come from the perspective, I believe players should be compensated. There's so much money going around based off of the work and the product that they deliver on the field, on the court. Why shouldn't they get paid?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that it's almost become like this age-old question now. I mean, how long has this been going on for? I view it like I view a lot of like social issues, in that I find it kind of surprising and perplexing that so many people are like strongly against it. I guess it's fine if you're not, in favor of it, as you seem to be, like a huge supporter or proponent of it, but like, how does it harm you if they are? This is going to ruin it, and I'm never going to watch, and all this. Well, okay. I don't see it like changing that much for fans, but I do think it's complicated. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say what I'm about to say, which is, I'm in favor of some sort of model, but I'm just not smart enough to figure out exactly how
the logistics as opposed to the ethics of it.
Exactly.
Okay.
There's certainly. You see what you see professional players now doing with, being spokespeople for various products. I mean, could that work, at the college level, instead of just simply getting paid by the school or the NCAA?
Sure.
Let
Allow
them
them
capitalize on their likeness,
or their brand that they've established themselves.
Right, because I mean, one thing's for sure, like for many of them, their Q factor, I guess, it will never be higher than it is during their time at a school like Michigan. Many do not go on.
Even imagine a player like Tate Forcier, who
was
huge
example.
for a while.
Peaked for a few weeks.
Yeah,
and
cover
like
Sports Illustrated.
Cover Sports Illustrated was a household. So why? And that may be a terrible example.
No, but that's a perfect.
No, I think it's a good one.
Didn't go to the pros, and like you said, that was his peak, really. I mean, even Johnny Manziel, Denard Robinson.
Yeah.
I mean,
the
list is huge of players who. I mean, and Denard Robinson was on the cover of a video game. Yeah. I mean, I know that was after college. So we probably did get compensation for that. But point being is that these are legitimate brand names, even if they were fleeting at the time. And so why shouldn't they be able to?
Right. I guess to give a voice to the people I was just saying I'm confused by. Many of them say, oh, they get enough already with this. Do you know how much a college costs now, and what having a college degree has? I mean. Again,
I think
that's kind of Harbaugh's argument too. He said, these guys are getting a degree and they're getting an education. And he mentioned, I think 1% of that was. Now this is quoting Harbaugh, but he said 1% of all high school football players only make it to college.
Sure.
And then he said 1% of college athletes get to the NFL.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know if that's wholly accurate, but that's what Jim said. But he's basically making the argument that these guys should be fortunate to play at this level. So whatever they get should be enough.
So if the scholarship, package and everything that goes along with it is worth $300,000 per person, and if that's maybe with football, still if you're a star quarterback or a Trey Burke, and you're probably bringing in through your performance far more money than that. I don't know if there's a way to calculate that, and that's why I find that argument to be
looking at this Drexel University.
Silly.
Drexel University did a study in 2011. The study estimates that the fair market value for the average FBS football player to be $120,000. The average fair market value for a college basketball player is $265,000. Now, keep in mind this was done in 2011, so these numbers probably aren't exactly up to par. But they looked at several things here. They looked at room and board. They looked at the value that they present for the university and themselves. So it was fascinating to look at. Obviously, stuff has been done to show this, that players are, in some instances, some guys are worth more than what they're receiving, sometimes a lot more.
Sure.
So there are numbers out there to support that stuff.
Yeah, there's just because you're getting a good amount of money, still doesn't mean it's the fair amount or the market value. I mean, that's what I would always say to these people who are like, well, they're already getting this much. Okay, well, if your job just decided, well, we're going to cut your pay in half because this is still fair. I mean, you wouldn't be happy about that. Right. It doesn't. So I just don't see it like that.
The key thing here is how do you quantify all that, and that's I think the problem we all run into. Like, how do you determine this? How do you determine how you're going to pay certain players? Because Eli, you and I were talking about this before, but in the case of football, more people care about the quarterback than the offensive lineman, the defensive lineman. So at the end of the day, should the quarterback be paid more than? So that's the model you got to figure out. If they were to turn to this, obviously there's so many things to hash out. Should something like this be in place? And obviously we're still far away from something like this happening.
And as you mentioned earlier, then you get to the question: if you're going to play football players, how
economics
and
that's
basketball
that's
players.
my thing with this thing. And I'm not opposed to paying college athletes because
what's the end of that? Then should you play tennis players?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
He knew where I was going.
That's from our listeners.
and that's the thing, and keep in mind, Michigan is one of those rare schools that their athletic department is self-sustaining. They can afford everything. They bring money in. Most schools, the University General Fund has to kick in for the athletic department. Football is one of the few sports in most schools that generates money, generates revenue. So beyond football, like you mentioned, where do you go from there? Do you pay the basketball players? Do you pay the women's basketball players? Do you pay the field hockey team?
Yeah. Well, what if you don't? I mean, what if you only do pay the football players and not pay? I mean, is there going to be like a revolt? I mean, what's going to happen? I don't see.
Yes.
The facts are that, one sport is widely more popular and brings in more money for the university. But, I don't know. There's also the whole thing about going, we talked about Denard or Tate, Forcier. I mean, you would think probably that part of they're getting paid, they're getting compensated in a way by when they do graduate, they probably do have a leg up on just, you or me trying to get a job because of that name recognition and what they did to the university. You almost hope they would. That's kind of like part of the deal.
But for the second string center that was a great, bolstered the program but never really saw the field, they don't really have that. And on top of that, football and basketball is so demanding, 24/7, 365, that can these guys really invest? Can one of them really be a pre-med and also participate full-time in football? You can't, which is why I'm personally in favor of, I wish they would let athletes just play football and then complete their degrees after their eligibility is up. Because I don't know how you could rightfully think that they could do that. It's just I can't
it's a story when they do. It's a story. The rare football player,
and they shouldn't be limited in their educational opportunities, especially if they're not getting compensation by athletics.
And there's literally classes they can't take because of scheduling conflicts. So it's very clear that a student athlete, one word comes first, and yet it's not really how it plays out.
I think there's one avenue that I think that can be changed pretty quickly, and it's letting players benefit off their likeness. It's one of those things where, say, Shea Patterson or whoever Michigan player you want, they're able to sign autographs on their own, make money off autographs, or be thrown on a billboard and be compensated for that. So I could see where that would be allowed, but the whole idea of paying guys a flat salary or paying them X amount of dollars because simply they're on a football team, to me, is economically. It doesn't work.
Yeah, that's the fairest way, the easiest way, honestly, to do it. As far as then talking about complaints from tennis or field hockey players, well, there you go. Go out and get it.
And there are opportunities, I think, for other sports. If you look at Michigan, like Kaden Flaherty, she had a big year in the women's basketball team. Maybe she had a big year. She should be able to try and benefit off that. Megan Bobey and the pitcher and the softball team. I mean, so I can think of other instances where players could try to make, like you said, try and benefit off their likeness. Now others are gonna I think bring in more money than others, obviously. But at the end of the day, I think that makes the most sense to me.
We could. Sorry, one more thing. We could talk about this for hours, obviously. But I think some people say, well, that's going to just widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots. First of all, okay. I mean, that's if you don't think they already have a recruiting advantage, they have a budget that they can spend to send players on private jets to go and to your house more times than another coach. I'd actually argue some of these smaller schools in these smaller towns where there's no professional team, they are really the big shots and the start. Like, I really do think that someone at some of these schools could be in commercials, for a car dealership.
You were in Kansas. You saw it firsthand.
I definitely did see it. But I saw a lot of from the former players. There's definitely this one commercial with Fred Van Vliet and Ron Baker, some former Wichita State basketball players, with some goofy, I don't even know what it was for. But
locally specific, but yeah.
I could see something like that in Lexington, Kentucky. I can see that something in Knoxville, Tennessee. I mean, there's
Columbus.
There is no ton around there.
Sure.
But even even places where the sports program isn't as
as
that's already
well,
right,
but
it's just a smaller town.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really appreciate. We've really attacked this from all angles, but we've only started this debate. We want you guys to try to finish it. Join us in the comments. Talk about what you think, both about sports betting and potentially paying or definitely not paying college athletes, whichever side of the argument you fall on. We really appreciate you joining us this week. We will be back next week, and until then.